By December 2019, Syria divided into 6 regions: government and pro-government forces, rebels, Free Syrian Army, moderate rebels, more radical groups, Free Syrian Army groups and Turkish troops in northern Syria, Kurds, Islamic State, and Golan Heights controlled by Israel. Following Syrian government victories in 2018 during the siege of eastern Ghouta, and the completion of rebel evacuations from eastern Kalamon, Idlib and Aleppo Governorates became the only significant opposition-controlled territory. Now Syrian government can concentrate its forces in northwestern Syria. On November 20, 2019, Ka was struck by a ground-to-ground missile from the Assad regime with Russian and Iranian support. It killed at least 16 people. This was the start of Syrian army offensive on rebel-held areas. By 15th of December, clashes occurred in several villages. Pro-Syrian government forces, supported by Russian airstrikes, captured villages. Pro-government airstrikes began to intensify on December 15, 2019. Meanwhile, on 17th of December, Russian intelligence reported that 300 fighters from the Turkish-backed Syrian National Army arrived in Idlib from Afrin in preparation for renewed fighting. After the 14th round of negotiations in New Sultan, Kazakhstan ended a few days prior without any definitive ceasefire agreement. Ground fighting resumed on 18th of December. Pro-Syrian army forces attacked several villages in southeastern Idlib, particularly along the Jalal axis. A Syrian military source said the objective of the operation was to capture territory south of Merid al-Numan, a key rebel stronghold on the M5 highway. By 26th of December, pro-government forces captured several villages in around Merid al-Numan. 30,000 people had fled from the areas around Merid al-Numan, while airstrikes on the M5 highway reportedly targeted civilians fleeing north from the front lines. On 26th of December, ground advancements largely halted and both sides began shelling each other's positions around Merid al-Numan, with casualties reported on both sides. Both government and opposition factions later reported that they paused their field operations in the Idlib region due to poor weather conditions. On 9th of January, the ceasefire was introduced in the Idlib de-escalation zone. Turkey's defense ministry announced that the ceasefire would take effect on 12th of January and said that Syrian and Russian land and air attacks would halt at 1 minute past midnight. The ceasefire was set to stem the flow of refugees from Idlib and allow the delivery of humanitarian aid to the region. Late on 15th of January, the Syrian Arab Army and its allies resumed offensive actions in southern Idlib in response to a prior series of apparent ceasefire violations by rebels. After a short lull, and after the Russia-Turkey ceasefire failed to materialize, the Syrian Arab Army renewed its ground offensive towards Merid al-Numan on 24th of January. Merid al-Numan was of both strategic and symbolic importance due to its location on the strategic M5 highway, and that it was a major center for anti-government protests against Assad's rule since the civil war began in 2011. By 15th of February, M5 highway completely captured, Syrian army shifted its momentum towards securing Greater Aleppo. On 17th of February, President Bashar al-Assad addressed the nation in a rare televised speech, saying the military operations in Aleppo and Idlib governorates would continue regardless of Turkey's threats. While government forces made territorial gains in southern Idlib and northern Hama, opposition factions with support from Turkish elements had counterattacked on a separate front towards Siraki Band. On the dawn of 27th of February, fully recaptured the strategic city and cut the Damascus-Aleppo M5 highway once again. Front lines continued to shift as the Syrian army's southern Idlib assault continued. Pro-government forces captured 20 additional villages in the Al-Ghab Plain and Zawiya mountain region. On 27th of February, in a major escalation, at around 5 p.m. local, pro-government airstrikes targeted a Turkish mechanized infantry battalion, composed of about 400 soldiers, near a post in Balyun in the Zawiya mountains, leaving at least 34 soldiers killed and others wounded. Turkey said it retaliated for the Balyun strikes by striking 200 Syrian government targets. Turkish forces also bombed defense and scientific research laboratories in the Syria area of the eastern Aleppo countryside and claimed to have targeted the Guwayrs and Abu al-Duhur military air bases in Aleppo Governorate. On 29 February, Turkish-backed rebels recaptured several villages in Al-Ghab plain, reversing recent government gains. By 5 March, clashes continued between Turkey and Syria and the 2020 Daraa clashes began. Following the 2018 offensive that brought Daraa under control of the Syrian Arab Army, tensions between reconciled rebels and the Syrian government remained high. Many rebel forces in the area agreed to Russian-brokered reconciliation deals, in which they laid down their weapons against the forces of Bashar al-Assad. Those who did not agree to the terms were sent to rebel-held areas in Idlib Governorate by bus. However, forced disappearances, forced conscription and assassinations of former rebel fighters and commanders became common. The March 2020 Daraa clashes was an armed conflict between rebel fighters aligned with the Free Syrian Army and Syrian government forces in the Daraa Governorate. Clashes began after the start of a government security operation against Free Syrian Army insurgent cells in Al-Sinameen and other areas in the Daraa Governorate that have been active since 2018. After the defeat of rebel forces in the province, this crackdown led to actions of retaliation by rebels across the province. A Russian-brokered agreement was reached between the two sides on March 2, 2020. Rebel fighters in Sinameen were to reconcile and hand over their weapons to the Syrian authorities under Russian auspices. Fighters were also given the option to be transported to the rebel-held north of the country. On 5 March, a meeting was held between Russian President Vladimir Putin and his Turkish counterpart Recep Tayyip Erdogan, after which both parties agreed to a military ceasefire in Idlib province of northwestern Syria. In order to fight the coronavirus outbreak, the UN Special Envoy for Syria on 24 March, urged for an instant ceasefire throughout the entire country which has been ravaged by war for the past decade. On 31 March, the Shayrat Air Base in Syria came under an Israeli missile attack, during a meeting between high-ranking officers of Syria and Iran with no casualties. On 1 April, as the Syrian war enters its 10th year, the death toll recorded in March is reportedly the lowest. During April, several clashes reported in northwest Syria. On 13 April, Turkish riot police dispersed dozens of Syrians participating in a sit-in on the M4 highway in the northwest linking the key cities of Sarakeb and Latakia. The incident showed a growing dissatisfaction toward the joint Russian-Turkish military presence in the area. On 28 April, a bombing in Afrin killed 40 people, including 11 children. No group claimed responsibility. On 11 May, reports from Amnesty International suggested that 18 attacks were carried out on civilian facilities. On 29 May, the Russian government proposed a dialogue with Assad's government, in an attempt to increase its military facilities in the country. President Vladimir Putin ordered the defense and foreign ministries to oversee the negotiation with the Syrian government and having access to more facilities on both land and sea. On 1 June, the Syrian Network for Human Rights reported that the death toll of civilians in the month of May in Syria had reached a total of 125, including 26 children and 6 women. On 3 June, the last rebel stronghold de-escalation zone was attacked by a series of airstrikes, carried out by Russian jets. On 7 June, clashes happened in the towns of Manara and Fadara, and the fighting left 22 rebels and 19 government soldiers killed. Israeli missiles were launched in southern and eastern Syria on 23 June, killing at least 2 Syrian soldiers and leaving 4 others injured. Israeli military officials have stated that it would seek the overhaul of Iranian presence in Syria. On 17 August, Syrian forces reportedly clashed with U.S. troops in northern Syria close to the Turkish border, which resulted in the death of 1 Syrian. 2 other Syrian soldiers were said to have been injured during the clash. On 26 September, a car bombing in Ras Al Ain left at least 7 people dead and another 10 were injured. On September 30th, dozens of Syrians demonstrated in Idlib city, to mark 5 years of Russia's intervention in the civil war, and stood amid the rubble of houses destroyed by Russian bombing, raising slogans such as "The Russian occupiers must leave" and "Putin and his warplanes destroyed the most ancient civilization in history." On 5 October, Oman became the first Persian Gulf country to reinstate its ambassador in Syria. On October 15, U.S. forces conducted a drone strike against al-Qaeda in the vicinity of Idlib, killing 2 senior members in the first drone strike by the U.S. military against the group in Syria since mid-September 2019. On 22nd of October, U.S.-led coalition drones targeted a meeting arranged by ex-ISIS commander with the participation of Hurz al-Din members in the village of Jakar in the Sakin area of Idlib, killing at least 23 persons including 17 jihadist fighters and 6 civilians. On October 26, Russian warplanes targeted a training camp of Faylak al-Sham, a Turkish-backed rebel group, near Kafr Karim in Idlib Governorate. The strike killed 78 fighters and wounded more than 90. The head of the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights called the strike the heaviest attack since the beginning of the ceasefire. On 18 November, an airstrike was launched in Syria by the Israeli military, which resulted in the death of 3 soldiers and 1 other injured. The airstrikes were said to have been carried out after the discovery of roadside bombs along the border in the Golan Heights, according to the Israeli military. On 22 November, a week after the death of Walid al-Muallim, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has designated Faisal Maqdad as Syria's new foreign minister. On 23 November, heavy clashes between Turkey-backed fighters and Kurdish fighters in Ain Issa resulted in the death of at least 11 fighters. On 25 December, the Syrian news agency reported that airstrikes were targeted at Masyaf, in the western province of Hama, although the Syrian air defenses were able to intercept the missiles. At least 6 pro-Iranian militia fighters were said to have been killed in Hama province. Satellite images suggested that 4 buildings for manufacturing weapons were damaged during the airstrikes. On December 31, a Syrian army convoy south of Deir az-Zor was ambushed by ISIS insurgents, leaving at least 37 Syrian army soldiers dead and wounded several others. It has been described as one of the deadliest attacks committed by ISIS since the fall of their caliphate in March 2019. In 2020, 2,858 pro-government forces, 2,693 anti-government, and 1,528 civilians lost their lives. In total, Syria lost 387,453 men since 2011. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel.